Hey, today I'm going to show you how to do this. Hey there, Greg Lewis coming at you from a teeny tiny, super small home studio. And today we're going to talk about how to make it not seem like such a small, teeny tiny home studio. Let's go through quickly this setup I have right here. I have a chair I stole from the living room. I have a white seamless paper hanging up in the background, which goes all the way down to the floor and comes around, giving the illusion of infinity, right? Behind here, you can't tell where the seam is. Right here, not so much, because it stops right there. And right here, not so much. That's always going to have to be dealt with after the fact. And we'll talk about that, and it's not that hard. Okay, as far as the subject goes, well, there's me, because I'm an empty nester and the wife doesn't want to get involved and the girl's too busy at university, so it's me. As far as the lighting is concerned, it's not that difficult. I've got a key light up here. I've metered it for f11 because the camera's on f11. I've got a speed light here at about half power going through this diffuser just to give me a little more light on this side. I kind of wanted it to be a sort of a high key situation, and you have to have the paper in the back sort of bright for what we're going to do. And also I have in front of me a small circular silver reflector just to give a little more pop in the front. So as far as the camera settings are concerned, in the studio you always want to be set on manual. And there are three settings to be concerned about. One is your ISO. I've got it set at my base ISO on this camera, which is 100. You should probably always do that in the studio because you've got all the light you need, and why not use the best quality that your camera can do, which is the lowest base ISO. 2, the shutter speed is set to 1/180th, which is the sync speed for the flash on this camera. If you don't know what the sync speed is for your camera, just look it up. It's usually between 180 and 200 or thereabouts. So far as the f-stops are concerned, I've got it set to f11, which is a good place for this particular lens. It's a nice sweet spot. Also, it gives me a larger depth of field because I'm having to do self-portraiture, and so I can't focus on myself every time. And so if I just kind of focus on this general area, it'll be in focus because there's a wide depth of field. Yeah? Okay. And that's it, really. One thing to note for this particular type of photography, I wouldn't put your hands or your feet outside of the white area because it makes it harder to fix and post. You can do it, but it's harder, and who wants to be hard? So get yourself in here. All right, so let's go ahead and take a picture. Oh, and of course, I have to take it with the timer because just me. Now, let's not really be too concerned about the effectiveness of my pose. It's just a pose for illustration purposes. And the lighting is, again, fairly even because that's kind of what I wanted in this particular shot. So now let's move over to Photoshop and finish this up. All right, so now I've taken the picture and put it into Lightroom. And this is actually a picture I took before we started recording. If I'm honest, I took some pictures before I started recording so I wouldn't have to worry about editing out my microphone. But it's the same setup and all the light's the same. So the first thing I noticed right away is it's pretty underexposed. I think I had moved the light away after I set it. So let's set the exposure a little higher. There's different ways you can set exposure. You can use the highlights and the whites and the shadows, but I'm just going to straight up do exposure up a little bit. And notice up there in my histogram, I'm pushing some stuff over the right, and I want to push this little thing up here because then it'll show me when this is actually fully white. And I think I'll use whites to push that up. And when we see red on there, see how you see red on there now? That tells me that that is completely white. Now I don't want too much because then my skin's going to get all weird and blowing out. So I'll just get it kind of white, a little whiter than you might think. You can go ahead and brush in that, but we don't need to do that for the purpose of this, I don't think. So I'm also going to lighten the blacks a little bit. And I kind of want to make this one a little bit of high key situation. So I'll lighten up the shadows a little bit and keep the highlights down so the white spots on my face don't go too crazy. So there you go. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do for my big, fat, ugly feet. All right, moving on. Let's go down a little bit and let's sharpen this image up just a tick to about 100. And let's go ahead and go down further and I always remove chromatic aberration and enable color corrections for the specific lens. I never really notice a big difference, but I think you're supposed to do it, so I do. All right, now that's about all I really want to do in Lightroom. Let's go over to Photoshop. And the way you do that is say Photo, Edit in, Edit in Photoshop. Okay, there I am in Photoshop. Now, the reason I didn't do what I'm about to do now in Lightroom is because you can't. And the reason, now you can do everything in Photoshop that you can do in Lightroom, but you can't do everything in Lightroom you can in Photoshop. Just bear that in mind. So if you don't have Lightroom and you want to do all this stuff, you can really just have Photoshop. The great thing about Lightroom is it allows you to organize your pictures, and it's easier to do mass edits across a lot of files for me. So most photographers have Lightroom and Photoshop. So anyway, the basic thing we want to do is move this paper farther out on the right and the left, and I'm going to do it in sort of a cheat way. I'm sure there's a lot of ways to do this, but this is how I'm going to do it. You select the rectangular marquee, and you want to select the white. Nope, didn't do it right. You want to select enough of this white to stretch it out. Let's start up here. But you don't want it to hit the chair because you don't want it to stretch the chair. Because what we're going to basically do is get this selected right where I want it with just the white. And now we're going to go to Edit, Transform, Scale, and then you want to hold down Shift. If you don't hold down Shift, it goes way out there like that, and that's not what we want to do. So we want to hold down Shift so it goes in one direction and just stretch out that white. And again, because I'm recording this, it's having a hard time catching up. That's why the things are weird. Then we're going to take the marquee tool on the other side and do the same thing. And we're going to click on there and select some white and only white, and then hit Edit, Transform, Scale. This wouldn't work if this wasn't pretty much white, right? You could see that, right? If it was other stuff, it'd look weird because you're basically stretching these pixels. But since it's basically white, it works. Let's go ahead and save that before it all crashes. So now that's pretty good. You can see over here, there's a little bit of weirdness and the shadows are kind of stretched out, but we can work that out in a second. But I want it to look like it's even a bigger space, like I'm a smaller person in a bigger space. And the way I'm going to do that, by the way, we should have done this before and I didn't. Let's go ahead and save this layer, add a new layer, and just to have a copy. I'm going to go ahead and make this whole thing, Edit, Transform, Scale, a little smaller, right? Just the whole me. And I'm going to put it right here in the middle. Okay, with my big, fat, ugly feet right there about in the middle. Then we're going to go ahead and catch that marquee tool again and do what we did again. Okay, now, this business over here I don't like, and this business over here I don't like. So there's a couple things we can do. What I'm going to do is just put a adjustment layer over the whole thing, right? Just clicking down here and saying, I think we'll do exposure. And see, now I've got a little layer that's just going to expose this thing. If you don't understand adjustment layers, you're just basically putting an invisible layer on top of this layer that does just that one thing you asked it to do. That doesn't make any sense at all, but it's adjustment layer. Look it up. So anyway, we're going to increase the exposure on all of this, but see now, we're increasing exposure on everything, right? But what I'm trying to do is get this to be a more or less really white situation. Like I want, see how I just want to get that all white and bright and clean the way I want it. However, now in order to bring this back, when you have an adjustment layer and you hit the brush and you make that brush big, there's different ways to make the brush big. I'm hitting right bracket. And if you push down Control and Option on a Mac, you can make that brush harder. See, what I'm doing is making it harder, or then I can make it softer. I'm not painting anything yet. I'm just making the edge of the brush softer. So I've got this big round brush. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and paint back in my picture. Now, if you want to get some of that out, okay, that's what happens when you push the brush and you're not selecting the layer. So I'm selecting the layer now. If you want to go back and forth, see, basically what I've done here is I've painted out a bit of this adjustment layer to expose what's underneath. But I think I've done too much. So if you hit X, it kind of goes back and you can paint all that back in, right? Again, rather slowly because my Mac is not doing a very good job. Okay, so let's go ahead and make that brush a little smaller, I think. We'll paint less things back in, right? And then hit X, and then we'll just paint out a little bit of stuff around me. Okay, and I want to paint out this a little bit too because I like the shadow. See, now I left a little shadow in. So now it really does look like infinity, right? Now it's all white. And just little me sitting in the middle. Now you wouldn't know, if you hadn't known this was done in Photoshop, that this wasn't done in a huge studio, right? You wouldn't know. But now you do know, because I just showed you. Last thing, let's go ahead and save this again. And let's hit Tab and bring it back into, oh, you know what? There's one more thing I want to do. I didn't notice this when I was taking the picture. On the inside of the leg here, there's a nasty looking tag I don't like. So I'm going to go ahead and take that out. And that's pretty easy to do in Photoshop. You just grab on this little guy, which is the patch tool, and you kind of go around that. There's different ways to do this. I think this should work pretty good. And you select right around that. And you just pull it down to a like surface, and it will just go voila. Oh, it's not working because I've selected the adjustment layer rather than the layer. So now, this time for sure, voila. See, now it's working. Okay. You just got to make sure you're clicking the layer you want to edit rather than the adjustments layer when you start using adjustment layers, and vice versa. All right, so I think that's pretty much what I want. Now, ooh, you could certainly make a... you might be able to say, that's probably not the most attractive subject and not the most attractive pose, but I think we got the point across. So with a little bit of effort, you can make your small, teeny, tiny home studio look like a really big super studio, which is awesome, right? All right, that's about it. Hey, if you like what you saw today, let me know. Or if you hate it, let me know. If you have a better way to do something that you saw me do, I'm all ears. But if you would like and share, that would be great. Thanks so much, stay focused, and have a great day.